very much. All right, great. So now we'll be recording, and that's exactly what we want to do, so that, because I know there are many people who are interested in this session that had conflicts with work or other things. So just a quick review of the schedule. For the next hour, we will be enjoying a presentation from Dr. Naomi Bates, faculty member and director of the engineering specialization. And she's going to walk us through the very kind of early stages of story mapping, which is a concept I know a little bit about, but not nearly enough. So I'm also really excited to learn. And then from 10 o'clock to noon Eastern time, so and starting an hour from now, I will then just have open office hours. Those are generally not recorded, but they are open as a group. And so if you have a specific or personal question now or in the future that you would prefer not for maybe other classmates to hear or be part of, that's fine. I just need to know that. And so then I can close the group off, or we can schedule a special time. But otherwise, that's just an open time period for me to help you troubleshoot with assignment questions, if you have questions about additional themes. I really encourage you to use this. When I taught last, I guess a year ago, when we taught going to scale, I tried to make a point every office hours to really just walk through the assignments. So if you came or you watched the office hour recordings, you got a lot of just free help telling you how to do, put your assignment together to make sure you did a really good job. So this is your time. It's optional. There are no grades associated with coming to office hours or watching the office hours. But this is the time that we're making sure we're putting ourselves out there to help. So I want to now quickly turn it over to Naomi, because I expect she's going to need most of her full hour of time. And I do apologize. I'm kind of expecting an urgent phone call from Nepal, and in that case, I might have to briefly pause off the call. But otherwise, we'll be recorded, and then starting in 1 hour, I'll just go into open office hours. So Naomi, over to you.
Luke, can I just interrupt before you start? Can you pin Naomi's video so that even during, if other people come in and out, her video is still there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I didn't know that.
And the other thing is, could you make both of us co-hosts just in case you disappear? And then
absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. All right. So Naomi, over to you.
Okay. Good morning. Just to tell you, I want to start with a little bit of background about how I came into the field. My background is in Appalachian flood hydrology, and I grew up in West Virginia and have a strong connection there. I currently live in Pennsylvania, but I'm hoping to relocate back to West Virginia. So in my graduate work, I began using spatial data. Well, actually, undergraduate, I began using spatial data very heavily in my work, and also understanding the importance of telling stories to go along with the science research that I'm doing. So I found that a lot of a very important part of my work was telling the story of why I was doing the work and what it meant. And so it's been a logical progression to come more into telling stories using spatial data. And now I feel like I'm working in this bridge between scientists and engineers and other folks. And I am happy to work with any of you who want to use spatial data in your work to bring that into your storytelling and into presenting your results. So I'm going to share my screen, and I realized as I was looking over this morning that although I'm talking about sharing stories in an exciting way, my story this morning, my slides are actually rather bland, so please excuse that. Okay, let's see if I can. Okay, can you see my, I think you should be able to see my screen. Someone
Yep.
holler at me if not.
Yep. You're looking good.
Okay.
We're on slide 1, Esri story maps.
Okay, yeah, here we go. So I'm going to talk about using Esri story maps as an engaging media for sharing your stories of applied community change. And just a little bit of an outline, we'll talk about storytelling in general, about electronic storytelling, about Esri and story maps and different story map concepts. I want to show you some examples of story maps, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you might go about telling your story and some resources to call on moving forward with that. So storytelling is just a way of sharing your experiences and information to provide interpretation for that. So they can be used for education, entertainment, and historically, storytelling's been going on long before we had written language, and it was used for cultural preservation. Sometimes stories are for instilling moral values, sometimes included dance, expressions, gesture, art, all these different things. And now we're looking at a lot of storytelling moving toward electronic media. And I mean, we're all reading stories every day and seeing stories every day through video or online stories. And some ways that you can use storytelling in your work are through outreach, bringing the work that you're doing, educating other people about that. It can become part of your portfolio, your online portfolio of your work. And also it can be very important in funding. Effective storytelling and getting out that information about what you have done can be important for funding. So traditional storytelling contains certain elements: characters, setting, theme, plot, what point of view you're taking, tone. Often there's a conflict and a resolution. And these are the same elements, or many of these elements we still want to use in telling a story electronically or as part of a story map. And we can supplement these with visuals, with photos, maps, graphics, videos. But one of the things that we need to think about some of the things that we need to think about as we're setting up any kind of storytelling is how the viewer will interact with the story. And when we're working with electronic stories, what's the viewing platform going to be? Is somebody going to view this on their phone or a tablet? Are they going to have high-speed internet connectivity? Or do we need to worry about bandwidth? And these are not things that you need to figure out right now. I just want to plant the ideas so they're there in the back of your head as you're thinking about telling your stories. Do you want people to click around in your story? Are they going to read straight through? Do you want them to zoom into certain areas? Just all things to keep in mind. And also, I think we have become a society that has a relatively short attention span. So how are you going to keep your audience engaged? Think about your paragraph size. Think about hooking them right away. Think about your graphics. They should be simple and easily understood. Think about how they're going to interact and make sure your story is clear. So moving on to Esri and story maps, I want to introduce just the concept of GIS for those who are not familiar with it. So GIS stands for Geographic Information System. And this is a system for storing, analyzing, and presenting spatial and geographic information. There are various different software available for this. Esri ArcGIS software is the one which I use largely. It's kind of dominates the market in the US, although there are many other software packages, including open source. Probably the largest open source GIS software at least in the US. And Esri has an ArcGIS online platform, which allows you to publish data online and also do some basic analysis online. And recently, in the last few years, they've developed story maps. So it's a tool specific to Esri. I mean, you could do this in many other ways, but we're going to focus on Esri's story maps. They're a tool for telling these stories using spatial data. So it's not just a series of plots, it's actually storytelling. And when you're setting up a story map, you need to think about your audience. Who are you trying to reach, and how will you connect with them? So are you trying to reach elementary school students? Are you trying to reach scientists? Are you trying to reach potential funders? Are you trying to reach NGOs that are working in the area? These are just things to keep in mind because it will affect how you put together your story. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to draw people in. So your title is important, your initial graphics are important. How do you hook your audience right away? There are different layouts, and you want to choose one that's best for your story. And you want your graphics to be simple and easy to understand. So I want to see if I can figure out how to share multiple things here or open different things. I want to start with just a couple examples of story maps. So this is a gallery of different story maps that have been published on Esri's site. And you can click through some of these on your own. I've provided links, but I want to start with sort of a simple, relatively simple map that so there's various different ways that you can present story maps. And this one is actually crowdsourced. So you can have contributors, and the contributors are placed, there's a marker placed where each of these is coming from, and then or on the pictures on the left-hand side, and it will tell more about their story. So if I click on this farm in Georgia, it'll tell a little bit about that. It includes links to their to more information about that farm, or potentially links to their website. So this is a presentation that's very much just a map locating different sites, and you click on that to then see the story of each of those sites. So this is very spatially distributed. They're all tied together with a common theme of being part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resource Conservation Service. But it's telling a variety of different stories. Here's a very different type of story map. I'll just go through a few quickly so you can see how much they vary. This is about low birth weight in the United States, and this type of story map is called Cascade, and you scroll down is how you interact with this. And it tells you the story with very simple graphics, and provides links to more information. Then it gets more into spatial information, and a lot of this is pulled from publicly available data. So it's, I don't know exactly the source of this, but a lot of the story maps pull publicly available data, census data, or data that can be found on the internet. Sometimes people have their own data that they're putting in. So there's many, many ways of putting together these maps. If I keep scrolling on this one, it continues to tell the story. Many of these maps, you just keep scrolling and they continue the story. So it's a very easy to interact with platform. And then there's another one about farming. You scroll through. This one starts out with a map at the beginning that puts things in context. And if you want to tell a story and you're not sure what spatial information to draw in for that, talk to us, and we may be able to pull together some publicly available information, help you, lead you to sources, or help you design what data you'd like to collect from your community, or your communities, or how that fits into a global context or a more local context. So scrolling through some of these will help you maybe think about the story that you want to tell. Some of them are very graphics intensive. I won't run this right now, but this one has many videos in the background. And it tells the story with mini stories and videos, and this is a personal story. So some of these stories are some story maps tell the story of just a single person or just a single place. Some can be very spatially distributed. I know I'm throwing a lot of ideas out here. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the possibilities are pretty much anything that you can think of. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. So keeping in mind these key elements, I've provided links to some of the these story maps that I showed. So it's never too early to begin thinking about what your story is and what the story that you want to tell will be. So whether it's about the community that you're working with or how that fits into a larger context, and begin thinking about what data you need now to tell that story. What kind of photos, what background information, what facts, what spatial data do you want to collect, do you want to include in that story? And this story will evolve over time. It's not what you come up with now will be very different than what you have in a few months. So I was trying to imagine what some sort of basic outlines might be for the stories you want to tell. And so you'll want background information, you'll want community and project description, some spatial information, and then if this is you're doing a story map on your graduate work here, you'll want to define what the seed scale concepts are and how you're using that, and then talk about taking that to scale and the impact of that. And if you're interested in starting on a story map, we can help provide access to Esri's training online. We can support you in developing your storyline and mapping and the use of spatial data, access to ArcGIS Online and the story mapping platform. And many of the lab assignments that you'll have for ACC 601 can be incorporated into the story map. Those will fit directly. You don't have to put them in a story map right now, but as you're building those data, you're building that information, keep in mind how that fits into your story. It'll all come together in a comprehensive piece, and the story map is just one way to pull that together.
Yeah. On that point, Naomi, I think, because I agree, and obviously you know more about this, but based on our discussions up until now, I think it's her point, at least for this course, is we have the story map as an option for basically all your lab assignments in ACC 601, and I hope a lot of the other faculty make that an option as well. But what that will be, your story map will be a cumulative product throughout the term. And so while if you think you might want to go this route, it's really important to work with Naomi and to be collecting that information and getting a rich set of data. But what's really important is to understand, first of all, you don't have to do this immediately. And you also don't necessarily need to make the decision of whether or not to do a story map, because this type of information that you're going to need for a good story map is exactly the kind of raw field data and information, or what we call in seed scale local evidence, that you're going to need to do well in this class regardless, because this is all about getting good documentation of your engagement with the community to tell your story. And so whether it's in a story map, it's on your e-portfolio, one of our other tool times, my friend will be coming and talking about making documentary videos. But you're always going to need to gather that information to tell your story regardless of the medium. And so I just wanted to highlight that point for all of you as you think about doing the assignments.
Yeah, this is just one possible way to present all this information you're going to be collecting and working with. So one way to begin, I think Luke's lab assignments will guide you through collecting much of the data that you need for a story map or putting together your story, but also keep in mind who the characters are and what the different elements of your story will be. And collecting those early or keeping that in mind as you move through things can help you from getting to the end and going, oh, I wish I'd gotten information about where this was or taken a photo here. So beginning to collect those elements now is good. And here are a few links just to some basic information about story maps, and we'll take a little bit more in-depth look at some of these websites in a minute. And I'll just leave this up. Feel free to contact me at any time if you have questions about GIS, about Esri software, or about story maps. Shoot me an email or give me a call, and we can discuss how to incorporate this if it's right for you for telling your story. It is another system to learn, and there's no reason that you have to do a story map. I'm just presenting that as a possible way to present your information. So let's go back to Esri's website, and and if someone is interested in starting on a story map now, you can go through these links and read them more in depth, and I'm happy to talk with you about any questions and give you access to some of the online training. But I think one of the first things, as they say, is to get ideas, go through some of the maps in the map gallery. Every year, Esri has a story maps contest. Look at some of the winners. What were the things that they have in common? That look at their graphics, look at their photos, and get ideas there. And then choosing a template. As we saw, there's many different ways to present your map or ways to present your story. So do you want to crowdsource data? Do you want to have something that you just scroll through? Do you want something that works well on a smartphone? These different things to think about. And that can be changed later. You don't have to decide any of this now. I'm just giving you background information. And then if you have spatial data, we have to get that in a way that can be incorporated into your story map. That needs to be on ArcGIS Online so that data can be accessed, and that's something that we can help you with. And then once you have your story map, you finalize that just like anything else. Make sure that it's it's edited, have someone else look over it, have 2 or 3 people look over it, give you feedback, have us look over it, give you feedback. And then you can publish that map to an audience. You can keep that map private, so it's just within the Future Generations circle. You can keep it, so it's just, you have to provide a direct link, or you can publish it out for anybody to view. And some of this shows the different apps, the different sort of layouts for story maps. So you can, this is just to give you ideas, you can have just a sequence of photos and a caption under each, and that can be a very simple story map. And then you put spatial information into each of those, and it'll place them on a map. You can, like we saw some of the others where it's scrolling through, so it's an easy to scroll through platform. You can have a series, you can have tabs, like many websites have tabs. You can have tabs in a series of stories. So if you had multiple communities you were working with, or multiple villages, or multiple people that you were working with, and you wanted to tell their stories, you could have tabs with different stories and background information. You can have crowdsourced photos, as we said. Anyway, the possibilities are pretty endless in how you use this. So begin thinking about it, come to me with ideas, and we can talk about it.
Naomi, a question. You were talking about publishing. So if I publish something, can I then unpublish it and go back and edit it, or is it like, kind of cook it, and once you hit go, it's out there?
You can continue to edit it. It's just then it will be publicly viewable. So
they can watch you edit or something.
Yeah, like any website, once it's out there, then make sure it's the way you want it to be.
Yeah. But so I'm certainly thinking, though, for instance, I mean, just because I think one fabulous resource of something like a story map is that it can continue to be an evolving product over time, especially in our field of community change, where maybe the initial story is getting the action started, but then a check-in every year on what has happened with the impact. And so I'm just kind of trying to think for my own purposes and telling my own stories how to do that. And so I think that is a really useful tool to be able to put it out there, publish it, get feedback on it, both in terms of user interface and also, because we're telling stories about life in the world, go back and do a second edition a year or two later.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a very important thing, is to keep adding to it, not view it as a static thing. None of these things are static. The data may change. You may want to add data as you get more data. You may take a photo that you think has got to be front and center on that. You may decide you want to present the data in a different way. And this is definitely something that can evolve over time as you build your story. So yeah, that's a good point, Luke. But yes, once it is published, then others will be able to access it. Now, we can publish just within our organization so that it can be viewed. Students could publish and you could view it, Luke, and Kelly and I could view it and give feedback without publishing to the whole internet. So there's different levels of publishing, but yes, once it's out there, then other people can begin to view it. So you want to just make sure that you don't publish a half-finished product. And I think that's all I really had prepared. So I wasn't nearly an hour. I just open it to discussion and questions. If there's any initial thoughts or ideas that you want to talk to me about, or I know I did run through that relatively quickly. So,
Naomi, I had a question about data.
Yeah.
So you kind of glossed over that. I think that's kind of interesting to me. So I assume that all the big World Bank and WHO and all those people sort of have data banks that are sort of easily accessible once you understand how that works. Can you just talk a little bit about that, or is it very complicated?
No, there's I'm most used to, because I'm a pretty heavy GIS user, I'm most used to accessing that from in the desktop software. But there are ArcGIS, Esri maintains sort of a database of all those data sets. And you can just pull them in directly. You can basically just grab the data and say, I want to use this piece of information. Data is a good thing to talk about a little more. There's so much data out there now, and there's a couple of things that you should consider when using data, especially pulling data off the internet, is where is it coming from? What's the quality of that data? Is there metadata to go along with it? And metadata is data about the data. So is there a good description of how this data was collected, when it was collected? You might find a census data that looks great, but it happens to be from 1965, and that's not what you want. So don't just start randomly pulling, I've got data. You have to be very careful how you use data, and if you're using it appropriately. How is the data collected? If it's, say, census data, or say it's medical data, was this medical data on, say, birth rates or something like that? Was that who was reporting that? Was it just doctors in a certain organization? Was it midwives? Was it home births? Was it, is it comprehensive data? Is it good? Is it, did the people collecting the data have an agenda? So there's a lot of really great, amazing data out there, and you can be overwhelmed by the publicly available data. But it's also very important to understand the sources and the quality and the errors associated with that. And I could go on and on about that. I have a pet peeve about bad uses of data, but there is an enormous amount of data out there, and much of it is from governments, and Esri maintains a lot of data. There are very good data sources, but like any source you're using, check it out. Check out the source.
Thanks. So there is sort of a data, so Esri, like Esri.com, I could look for the data banks that they have and just see, and they've sort of been vetted, is what you're saying, possibly?
Yeah, I'll have to I can send out some links about how to access some of that data. There's sort of a movement called open data. So it's it's data that's open to the public. And that is maintained, one platform of that is maintained through Esri. And through ArcGIS Online, a lot of that data, you can get initial plots of that data directly from Esri's website. Also, a good place to go is, if you're working in the United States, different state GIS websites, or census data, U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Geological Survey. In other countries, there might be a government website for this data, or it varies a lot where this data is stored. But if you have questions, if you're in Vietnam and want to help find data, we can search the internet. We can also see if Dan can help us out. I don't know, but we can look for that data and dig a little deeper, because there is a lot out there. There's sort of base maps for the whole world that include roads and towns and important places and elevation data. Some of that's better than others, and sometimes we want to move something besides Esri's platform or besides Google's data. For example, in many areas, OpenStreetMaps has much more information than Google or Esri's databases. So a lot of that information has been added by individual users. For example, in Nepal, there's much more information on OpenStreetMaps than the other more common platforms. So we can help you look around for where to find data, where to find maps. Yeah.
Thanks.
I really appreciate your introduction, Naomi. I think we could probably play precisely with some Vietnamese examples, because all of the master's students that are online tonight are, in fact, from Vietnam. Yeah. The topic last night was emergence, that Luke was raising in the ACC course. And with the change that is unfolding in the Mekong Delta, the focus of the students, who are all teachers or professionals in Gan Ta, is the immense and very fast change from rural to urban, from agricultural to industrial. A traditional life and lifespan and livelihoods that are affected by multiple vectors of climate change. The common occurrence of flooding and the severity of the flooding from the Mekong. The population growth, the growth of roads, the incursion into precious soil and paddy land, which is now being paved. It's just really an endless number of things that are stories of the change in the Delta. In fact, we're calling it Delta of Delta. This is the Mekong Delta, and Delta is the symbol in Greek of change, so this is the Delta of Delta. Now, specifically, all of our students here are affiliated with high schools. And if there would be a way for us to be doing English language learning and using that English to think critically as citizen scientists about the Delta of Delta, creating story maps that demonstrate what this high school is learning, what that high school is learning, what that high school is doing, what this one is collaborating with another high school on. What this does is it begins to create a terribly important place on every high school campus in the Mekong Delta, the high school. And on that high school, it creates a terribly important classroom, the language classroom. And it's beginning to show 16 and 17 and 18-year-old youth how important they are as a citizen scientist. Which then goes to Kelly's question about data and your response. Is it good data? Is it responsible? Is it ethical? Is it being gathered in a strategic, reliable, credible, replicable way? Because as you point out, you can supply any kind of data. It can be horrible data, and it might look good. It might be a beautiful story map, but it could be backed up with very poor quality information. And you might have lots and lots of data, but very, very poor quality analysis. Or you could have crowdsource available data, but just a tiny piece of it is used, and not enough of it is used for it to be good research and science. The conference I was at said that 0.5%, 1/2 of 1% of all crowdsourced data is actually used. And then an even smaller portion of that 1/2 of 1% is data that is actually analyzed. So we have this wonderful resource and this potential to tell a story and get people to think critically about their change. How shall we do that in a responsible way that makes it good change? Let me invite Zui and Yin and Dien and Mao and Chang and Vietche and Chup and Tu. You're all there. If any of this makes sense or gives you some ideas in the context of your high school or your language center, at dinner tonight, you know, there are now 100 language centers in Ganta, and you are the vice director of the best one and the biggest one of them all. What if we story mapped the emergence of all of these language centers, but what good are they? How good are they? What is the impact on community of all of these centers? Or Zui, if we were to compare Viet Cong high schools with Ganta high schools, with Dom Thap and Sok Chang high schools, on how they're approaching the change. Just lots of ideas. Let me throw it open to you, and you can ask Naomi how we might proceed.
Absolutely, Dan. Let me also just give a plug, because what you're talking about, this is why you come to office hours, is to get great help with your assignments. This week's lab assignment, this whole product of what we're asking you to do, is exactly the type of thing that Dan just he was talking about, is what's your real impact? You can go in with all kinds of hopes, the best of intent, but as you say, Dan, what really is the impact you're having, and what does it actually matter? And that question, and so I encourage you, open this up for discussion, have this as a group around this idea of story mapping, because this is exactly what your lab assignment is also asking you to do. Is we all know what you're trying to do, but what is the data? What is the evidence actually showing is happening on the other end in the community? So I just wanted to help bring that full circle. But absolutely, please, from all of our Vietnamese colleagues, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, while you're thinking, oh, are you talking, Luke?
Well, I just said, remember, because I can't see everybody's video, you might be trying to respond and have your microphone muted. So if you're talking, just make sure to turn off your microphone.
I want to jump in with one more comment about data and collecting information. As you were talking about the high schools and impact, it made me think about normalizing data a little bit. And as you're showing impact, there's multiple ways you could show, say, the number of students you're reaching. But there might also be a very small school and a very large school. And if you're reaching 100% of the students, I'm just using 100% because it's easy to work with. If you're using 100%, if you're reaching 100% of the students at a school with 100 students versus 1,000 students, if you plot those on a map, you might say, oh, the impact was low over here. So you might think about the percentage. So if you're collecting data, maybe collect both the total number and the number that you're reaching. These are just some ideas to think about. Don't look beyond just the number, oh, we've reached this many people, but how many people were there to reach? Or as you begin to plot up your data, these kind of things are good to have. You might use it, you might not, but it's better to record more information than wish you had it later.
Luke, last night your discussion caused us to think about emergence and control and assessment and the amount of power there is in those who tell us how do we assess the change in the delta. So to Naomi's point, what if we were to think about how youth are using their English? It's not just to get a score. It's not just to memorize a grammar point. It's to have a positive impact in their community. And through story mapping, we would be able to demonstrate across all the high schools and the junior high schools and the elementary schools how young Vietnamese youth are using their English. Zui, I'm looking at your picture there, and every time I look at your face, immediately the question that comes to mind is motivation. Zui is always telling us, how do we motivate the students? What if we were motivating students by showing through story mapping all the amazing uses they are making of their English? And Din, I'm looking at your face there, and your work with the Mekong Development Institute, just the series of changes that are happening to the Mekong River and the Mekong ecosystem. And you've been there for what, 16 years? And perhaps you've seen and have your finger on the data of changes that your institute has been tracking for 16 years. It's really endless what you can do with our story of how we might use data or how we might use our English. And okay, now we get to something that I think Luke will talk about later in his course, but how we learn, why we learn, and how we apply our learning to our livelihoods. So it's not just about gathering the data or learning the English. It's about how do we learn and how do we apply that learning to positively impact our community. So I'm gonna mute because I want to hear from you people.
Last night I was most interested in the generational shift because I'm working with kids right now, aged from like 10 to 18 years old, in different kinds of program and clubs. So what I have seen, like they are taking the roles of the older, generation learners to do different things. So I'm wondering, like if the story I tell should be like large scale or like small scale, what kind of data will lively reflect what they can do to reflect their shift? Like, how can we see that? Just photo or like statistic or something can support them to record it, what they do. And I think because I do the program not for 1 year, this is for 2 years, and then the other 2 years for different groups. So if I want to use that as a model to prompt, the next group to do something more or like improve themselves, make the step forward with the previous data. So what should I do with that? A little bit like messy with all of the things I receive right now.
I mean, maybe you could start by, I've been sort of calling it storyboarding, but outlining the key concepts and what are sort of the subheadings that would go under those. And then you'll see, oh, maybe you can rearrange it. Or almost like storyboarding a comic strip. These are the panels that I want to show, and then how do I organize those so they make sense? Do I end up with these 4 things that I want to tell that all go under this topic, and these 4 things that I want to tell that all go under this topic? Or do I have, are all 8 of those things kind of equal? And I think if you start just outlining it, or I mean, for me, I work better on paper sometimes, so I'll write down all the things and then I'll cut it out and rearrange it. I get out my glue stick and scissors all the time still. And I think just organizing it in your mind, and you know the story best, and so you'll if you can figure out what things go together and what things are separate, then you can begin to see what data you need there. What data do you have? You have the number of students, the ages, maybe the projects they did, their impact. Do all those come together nicely, or do you need to tell different stories for the different ages? Those kind of things, I think, and maybe we can work together sometime and you can tell me more about those stories and I can give you feedback. But for any of these things, I think the first thing is just to start putting together that story in your own mind, and then practice telling it to other people. And then what information, what are the questions that your colleagues are asking? Oh, how many students were there? Oh, what ages were there? You'll see the important pieces maybe pop out. That's where I would start.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that, Naomi, that the social scientist in me, the kind of, we're always, when, from the ethnographic anthropological standpoint, we're always being kind of constantly trained to not dictate the narrative, let the facts lead us. You can look at something and as the social scientist, you probably have an initial interpretation of what happened, but that the importance of not deciding how the story ends before you process the data all the way through, because there's always these unexpected turns, and this is why we also have started with this first lab assignment of what's actually happening versus what you want to have happen. But I think we had one. I looked like somebody else was about to jump in with a comment or an example of some story mapping.
Zui, were you going to offer something? Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Speak a little louder, but we can hear you. But you have to speak up a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe a story in my mind. But when I want to follow it, when I want to make a comparison, how the way we study or teach English 50 years ago and nowadays. And when I collect the data, and I don't have the data of 15 years ago, or how can I follow my story? It's because at that time, internet is not very popular for us. I have to change my story, or I have to find another way. And,
So I think what I've heard, and correct me, and Zui, maybe you can type in the chat if we didn't hear you correctly. Your question is, if you're trying to explain the change and we don't have data from 5 years ago or from 10 years ago, what do we do? Is that your question? All right, Naomi, what do we do?
Yeah, that's a I think something we all encounter. We wish we had data from 50 years ago. I think that in many cases, as part of storytelling, anecdotal information is okay. We just have to put it in context and be clear that that's not hard data. It's we have to say how we came about that data. Is this information that's passed down orally? Is it somebody's grandfather knows this? Is it old river terraces that used to be somewhere indicating that the river has moved? Is it newspaper articles? Where is this information coming from? So treating it a little bit differently, but I think it is important to draw in whatever historical information we have. We just have to treat it as such.
Absolutely. And just to, I think this is really, I'm excited because Naomi and I come from very, very different backgrounds as far as how we would approach a subject like this. And because, yeah, absolutely, in the kind of social sciences, anthropological fields, we always assume because we're using soft data, not the hard data that Naomi was referring to. And so absolutely, and we'll talk about this a lot later in the course, is the power of using stories. One of my top anthropology professors, there's the subfield called folklore, and that's all about using historical stories and anecdotes as real evidence and as real data to understand the culture at the time. And I think, so one of the big things is Naomi said, you just have to be clear what kind of data you're using and how certain or you can actually be when you draw upon that data. And the other is then be consistent about the data. So if you're using photographs for historical data, you can't really do an actual comparison with suddenly climate measurement, temperature measures from last year. That's not fair. But a photograph from yesterday to a photograph from 50 years ago, that is where your narrative and your data is leading. So I think we can often, as Naomi said, everybody always wants more data from beforehand, the baseline data. And there are some interesting ways. We'll talk about one case study Future Generations was involved with, where we were able to recreate that data, once again, using stories. And so I would just say, you want to be consistent with it, but certainly data comes in many shapes and forms, and this is what we mean. Just be clear on what kind of data you're using and then how you use it. But certainly in community settings, stories, pictures, all of this provides us with a rich layering. You then just need to stay in that form of data instead of jumping ship.
Okay, so we just had another question on the chat board, asking how do we then upload our story maps to the internet. And hang in there as we, this was introduced to you a little bit during base camp by Christy and by Kelly. You're going to have an e-portfolio. Your high school will have an e-portfolio. You, the teacher, you and Viet Chu at your high school are going to be the curators of an e-portfolio of your high school and what English students are learning and doing with their language skills, with their knowledge. And then you will choose to make that as public or as private as you want to. With the Mahara ePortfolio software, you will make it open to the world, or you will keep it just to Bending Bamboo and to other high schools, or you will keep it just to the students of your high school. It's your choice. Luke or Kelly, do you want to say anything else about the potential that the students, the teachers, the high schools have to share their story maps as they are developed?
Well,
thanks for the questions.
I'll defer to Kelly because she is our ePortfolio guru, but absolutely, I think Naomi also jump in because some of this is already going to be online depending on the software. Is that correct? But then absolutely, you would then go and showcase that in your ePortfolio. And we'll be doing some of this at the end of ACC 601. You'll see at the very last week, we're going to have of 601, we're going to take all the lab assignments you've done and basically do a little miniature story map on your ePortfolio where you're going to stack up all the assignments, which you'll see is all the assignments, the lab assignments I've put together for the course. They go right on top of one another. So even at the end, you're going to have a much different understanding of who and what your community is through gathering a lot of this type of information. And that's what we're going to be asking you to do through each of the lab assignments.
So I can answer a question. Well, my first response to Dewey's question is really about storage of video, because I think sometimes you start collecting videos and you run out of places to put the videos and places to kind of store the raw material that you're collecting while you sort of edit it and find the pieces that you want. And Luke mentioned that he's going to have his friend come in and do and tell us a little bit about, there's quite a few free video editing software platforms out there, and he'd give us some advice about which ones are the best to use. I've been using a couple of different ones to edit the Zoom videos that we've been making. Just a couple of notes. Yes, you can upload and use that portfolio area. You can upload up to 500 megabytes per file within your file area of Mahara portfolio. That doesn't have to be associated with any of your tasks. So just kind of a place to hold things. The other place to kind of hold things is in YouTube. So you have an @Future.edu account. That's really a Gmail account. And within that Gmail account, you have a YouTube channel. Now you can upload videos and make them private or unlisted into your YouTube account and then use that. I've been using that as a place to store, again, videos so that I have them at work and I have them at home and I have access to them. So that was kind of when you asked the question, that's what I was going for. As far as the final product, yeah, we'll get there eventually. There's a couple of different layout options and how you share which way, and that will all depend on, again, like Naomi said, your audience, if they're going to be seeing it on a phone, or if they happen to be GIS people, or if they happen to be people that are more comfortable with a YouTube video, or if they're people that are more comfortable with an entire ePortfolio. So those are my little tips on collecting video, because it's quite a minefield. As if you've started that, it's yeah. And we can give you more advice and support on that as we go through. If you find yourself kind of struggling with, I have this video and it's too big and it's not going here, it's not going there, we can help you out.
And just on presenting those in story maps, you can embed video in those, either as a little piece of your story or something that automatically plays as you scroll through. So there's many ways to embed video in that, but you want that to be a not just that, a well-edited little chunk, because again, you don't want someone to have to watch for 10 minutes probably. You want a little snippet that's conveying exactly the information you want to convey. But those are you can link to a YouTube video or link to something that's stored somewhere else. So you're not necessarily, the story map is a way of pulling together pieces of information, but it's not going to be a storage place for those videos. It's not even going to be a storage place for the spatial data. That will be stored in ArcGIS Online, and then you link to it. So the story map is really just a way of pulling together elements of the story to tell it.
Can we use story map to improve the map behind Kelly's head?
Yes. Well, yes, we could, of course.
Well, are there any other pressing questions? Otherwise, we're reaching the end of the tool time hour, and I'm happy to let tool time go on for all of office hours if that's helpful. But I know that I only requested an hour of Naomi's time, and I know that it's probably late there, and some other people might have additional office hour type questions, but I don't want to shut down the story mapping discussion too abruptly. So if there are any other questions or points, we can keep the conversation going. Otherwise, reach out to me, reach out to Naomi. Naomi will be sitting in and helping me as an instructing assistant throughout, as will Dan, throughout most of ACC 601. The way she joined our call yesterday, so she will also be available throughout to also help you guys with this. And this has been a really exciting discussion. But so certainly speak up if you have some additional questions. Otherwise, I'm going to turn off the record, and then I can stick around. I actually will probably put the Zoom session on pause with my timer for about 5 or 10 minutes to make that call that I mentioned I was expecting to come in, and then pick it up around 10:10. But are there any closing thoughts or questions on story mapping?
So Naomi, I'll write to you following up on a conversation on how you might enrich our workshop, which starts next Wednesday and goes to the end of the month. And story mapping was something that we wanted to introduce in the 3rd week of the workshop. So still a few weeks away. And while we have everybody here too, we're meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow night, Gunta time, to go over class and look ahead to next week. Is that right?
Yeah. That's 9 from 9 to 10, whatever.
And we
PM.
use your.
I'm gonna turn my record back on and do a very quick screen share in case there is any question on how to get there. Since that is a useful function. So, nope. Sorry. Okay. So I just, everybody, let me switch my role to a student so it looks exactly as it does for all of you. So every week you will go to this file if you want to watch the recording. It says recorded weekly Zoom sessions. And if you go in there, you'll see this will become a cascading list. Each time I'll have the discussion, what the core theme was, the date of the class session, and then if you just hit this YouTube link, you can watch the full recording of the video. Now keep in mind that recording just runs while the anytime that I have the room open, that's one reason that we sometimes pause the recording or stop it. Thank you again for reminding us to record this office hours. So on that recording, you might have to skip to about, I think it's around 5 minutes into the recording is when class really starts. So if it's just a blank screen for the first couple of minutes, don't be worried about that. I reviewed and watched it last night. It's a wonderful recording. I do want to thank all of you who were on there. Great discussion. I, once again, really want to applaud the example of generational shifts as a great example of emergence. Absolutely love that. And so I just want to direct everybody, that recording is there now. And then just like this, later today, you will see under this optional office hours tab, another one of these files, and that will have, and it will specifically say recordings from tool time. And so today's 1 hour recording will probably be there later tonight, my time, tomorrow morning for those of you who are joining us from other parts of the world. So with this, I'm going to stop my screen share and